Hey there, welcome to Spectrum Pulse, where we talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And now, time for the last of our big list, the top 50 best albums of 2025. For a number of years now, I've described this list as a professional obligation. The list that's more for fellow or aspiring critics, insert claims about putting a line in the sand and establishing discourse about a given year. It's not like I haven't said it time or time again, or then followed it with a repudiation or some other kind of deconstruction of it. This is the 13th time I've made a year-end albums list. You run out of preamble eventually. I could also add some remarks about genre from what I had heard. Hip-hop and metal in particular had really strong years. Rock was wildly inconsistent yet again. Pop may have actually had a sneaky underrated year, just not remotely close to the mainstream charts, and the pop that I liked was only half close to the critical consensus. And country... well, yeah, we'll get into it. But even then, it feels a little paltry every time I try to make some of that analysis because while I get a pretty representative sample of genres in my 180 plus reviews over the course of this year, I cannot physically hear everything. It's just my opinion on the slice that I can cover, and I've got to be able to accept that. But there were two events that made me shift my approach to this year-end list in particular. The first being a piece for Quietus that Drew Daniel of the experimental electronic group Matmos did, actually way back in 2014, but it made the rounds again. I saw it this year. It's titled 13 Reasons I Can't Pick My 13 Favorite Records. It's linked down in the description. It's an excellent read, a very thoughtful and deconstructive article. Not exactly surprising from one of the guys coming out of Matmos, specifically trying to dig into the faults of asking artists to pick and then rank albums, from personal conflicts of interest to more high-minded philosophy about the qualitative and quantitative analysis of art, some of which really isn't that applicable to critics in comparison with artists, some of which I absolutely agree with, corresponds with the rationale that I no longer use scores, even as I know that it probably diminishes my audience and annoys some of you to no end. The second, and considerably more worrying bit of information that I got is Uproxx in the process of restructuring itself, in my opinion not for the better, discontinuing their critics poll, which they had taken over since the Village Voice discontinued their decades-long version of it back in 2018, which means that there isn't really an aggregated critics poll that's got wide circulation anymore, at least not one that I could find. And it really bothers me that from what I can see, nobody seems to care. Maybe it's the balkanization of social media, where we really do not have as much of a free and open internet as we think we do, when we give authority to platforms or publications that will then simultaneously mismanage, underpromote, and then drop music writers because they're treated as disposable, thrown out to album of the year or rate your music, where everyone's rating and analysis is equal, despite the long-running considerable issues with both platforms, where every critic who's a veteran or amateur is just forced to fend for themselves. But it's very worrisome to me that so much history, so much collective consensus, but also fascinating disagreements, and an archive of what we thought was worth hearing and analyzing and writing about in 2025, if not going forward, it's just been dropped. Ignored. It'll likely not be renewed because that requires an organizing effort that no masthead nor editor wants to do. The past couple of years, especially in the realms of badly timed pivots or layoffs, it's proven that the institutional music media does not value a lot of what makes them special, certainly in the long term, and certainly doesn't value their own mastheads enough to protect those who are right beneath them. Hell, I'm one of the lucky ones who has his own established indexed website and a pretty established channel with a following. And I maintain my own archive going back over a decade, which got me in the door to submit to that critics poll in the first place. In an increasingly polluted internet swimming in the digital waste runoff that is AI content, where I have disabled every AI crawler of my writing and my website because you're not getting my voice co-opted, how many will have the same opportunity to build like I have? I mean, there's time for deconstruction construction of what is even the purpose of ranking albums, a lot of which is deserving of thought. I do it all the time. But if only for curation to assess and highlight acts that will likely get precious little coverage, because even if I, as a critic, I'm fighting uphill, independent artists are fighting even harder, or just to maintain my own archive and tradition against every societal force that wants opinion boiled down to easily consumable slop, well, this is no longer professional obligation to me. It feels like duty. Is it self-righteous? Yeah, it's me. But if I'm not righteous on behalf of myself, who will be? Let's get on to the list. This album ebbed and flowed for me all year. I really love Tamara Lindman's soft focus, husky self-care journey to break free of the dissociative fugue state that she is in, with thoughtfully complex framing to contextualize its padded, myopic walls with a singular balm in facing down forces that can feel inevitable or crushing, where the weight of despair is its own weapon against him. Yet, this album was just perfectly timed early in the year as a gorgeously arranged mechanism of survival and self-care. Maybe a little too tasteful for its own good. Some of that production gloss, some of that is the feeling that a larger and more focused systemic lens is probably needed to go further, but the emotive journey is compelling as all hell. Very much underrated and misunderstood this year, and for those who felt all that weight, I think it's worth revisiting.
You want raw, I got it. You want pure, I got it. I talk white and slangy bonnets. Yeah. You want raw, I got it. You want pure, I got it. Talk white and slangy bonnets.
Now this was also worth many revisits, but that's because Bruiser Wolf is such an infectiously funny and deeply charismatic personality in hip-hop, especially in the underground, that while this felt a bit transitional following My Story Got Stories last year, it was still relentlessly enjoyable, especially as he seems committed to proving that he can actually handle some cleaner and even more contemporary grooves in production, all of which still feel indebted to a lot of his hometown of Detroit. There's history and stories here. Now that, alongside a more low-key yet consistent second album in Made by Doe, produced entirely by Harry Fraud, if you know that production and you know Bruiser Wolf's run of punchlines and wit, you kind of know exactly how that album would sound, almost to a fault. That's kind of the reason I didn't review it. I didn't have a lot to say. It shows that he was really testing the waters this year, feeling out his next steps for the next big swing. I hope he found what he was looking for, but this, tasty as all hell along the way.
So tight we got stuck.
I would argue that this is an album that suffered from the failures of many critics to actually meet it where it was. It was a soft-focus, borderline mid-2000s adult contemporary love story where Lucy Dacus softened many of her edges to see through the breakup and then a new union with Julian Baker, where I would honestly argue that her album with Torres this year is a required companion piece to Forever Is a Feeling, because it adds just so much weight to Baker's addiction struggles and a lot of the self-conscious weight that Lucy Dacus takes on with this new relationship. She knows what she's getting into. That does cover up for some other issues, a weirdly abbreviated structure, a couple of production missteps, the odd feeling that Lucy Dacus might be pulling some of her punches as a writer, and that can bother some. But delve a little bit deeper and you'll find that the more subtle performance and the plain-spoken, almost desperate clarity gives this remarkable heft, alongside a few absolute layered standouts like Come Out and Bullseye. If Forever is indeed just a feeling, I can appreciate its quiet greatness while dreading the moment that it might indeed fade.
Ducking Mazel Tov cocktails, rockets propelled, exploding schools and hospitals. My enemy don't fight fair, so why should I? I got my conqueror. They wanna fuck with who? I watch from the shadows, shampoo the gallows, grease the guillotine. Remember Ken, we was Philistines. No one in my lineage has ever been king. My kin of criminals prone to itinerant wandering.
What can I say? It's not the fault of the art, or the artist's response to my review was exactly that I predicted it would be, for better and for worse. It also leads to a lot of fascinating, deep conversations about what art is allowed to be, where it's allowed to be raw and uncomfortable and deeply ugly, where it spills into the paratext, where in the righteous effort to clear your name, you seek the consequences of that embittered slash and burn. And to Rap Ferreira's credit, there are enough self-aware moments, especially across the back half of this album, alongside great poetry and more focused production, that is a really good examination of all of it. Should I have handled the review with a little bit more grace, handled him with more grace? Perhaps. Would I have received such grace in return? History tends to lend a lot of doubt to me there. And to his credit, Energy recognizes its own. One of the more challenging underground rap albums of 2025, where the more you learn, the more challenging it is. And despite the discomfort of it all, I think we might be better for it. There's more like it on this list. Okay, I telegraphed this in the last video. It should not be a surprise that, to me, this is the Ethel Cain album that's making the year-end list. Not Willoughby Tucker, which had one genuinely tremendous song and many moments that should coalesce into more than what they are in both the production and the content. But I also get the impression that Hayden, aka Ethel Cain, would rather make more challenging, abstract projects rooted more in drone, noise, and a twisted blur of sexual and religious ecstasy than anything with actual crossover potential, and I think she's great for it. An album not just about deviancy or masturbation, but the constant chase of euphoric release, where finding the smallest of earthly delights nevertheless might keep us further from that higher experience, that true transcendence, with a real bittersweet tang and a sort of backwoods field recording atmosphere building that is visceral and second to none. Again, it's one hell of a challenging project, certainly not for everyone, but with my deepest fondness for a lot of ambient music, where it actually wound up a little bit more accessible than I had expected, I returned to this a lot more than I thought I would in 2025. Make of that what you will.
Said you know way too, no way too big, no way too. Said you no way too. Said you know way too big, no way too.
I don't know if we're ever going to get another Frank Ocean album, but I also want to stress that Kamari is more than just the next best thing in his vocal similarity. Getting away from RCA was him finding a way to flex a more organic and grounded texture in R&B, where the parallels to the late D'Angelo are obvious but kind of welcome, allowing the songs to sprawl and showcase the actual tension between the frustrating companionship and a lonely road that might lead towards freedom. There is a certain music school refinement here, if you know, you know, where a few more artistic swerves and flourishes could add a little more diversity and expand his sound and ideas. It certainly will satisfy the school of R&B traditionalist, which has me increasingly exasperated how his former label really could not launch his voice or sound or market him properly. But the transition is built into the album's meta text, and rock-solid fundamentals can make for some excellent jams. It is another criminally underrated album this year. Y'all need to hear it. soft focus, spacey exploration of this brand of Canadian black gaze and black metal, seeking escape from depressive melancholy amidst the stars, and with just enough twinkles and gorgeous shimmer in order to get there. It's definitely not as strong as 2021's Beautiful Ghost to me. I chalk some of that up to slightly underpowered grooves in the low end, and the poetry not quite nailing the swell, but Unrequited is one of the best at simply crafting some gorgeous melodies and crescendos while further expanding and softening a lot of the textures around them. In an oversaturated genre, they still manage to find a way to sing the body electric, and it feels very special. You may not have returned to it that much since you dropped very early in this year, if you heard it at all, but man, you should.
No front teeth where they all used to go, broken apart and shining. No front teeth, but a feeling I know, back where the starting line is.
The odd thing in talking about Perfume Genius in 2025 is that this album is not remotely bad. It's still great. Mike Hadrius is an excellent singer. The arrangements are strikingly beautiful. There's an evocative swell to his trembling intensity in his songwriting and delivery, which creates some powerful images and emotions. If nothing else, No Front Teeth with Aldous Harding is one of the best songs of this year. But Glory has often been defined as a step down from his 2010s run, and I kinda get why. It is front-loaded, it's not as visceral, and intentionally so. It's a more comfortable album where Hadrius seems aware things are going to fall apart but haven't gotten there yet, where there's an additional breath being taken before going for broke. And while the self-awareness is welcome, it feels a little smaller, self-contained as a result, which is why it's nowhere near as high as previous Perfume Genius albums are on my list. But Glory's high floor of genuine greatness means it's still special, if only in smaller moments. And those, they can still mean so much. This is one of the biggest surprises and best possible introductions of 2025 to me, but also one of the most relevant seeming, especially as the year's gone on. In a year where way too many wanted to give in without protest, it was nice to hear some southern fried, deeply queer, anti-fascist progressive metal to spit back with virulent fury, both to the intensely personal struggle to survive and not succumb to despair or guilt for their survival, but also roar back with seething contempt and more theatrical attitude than so many others dared, and it was effective, coupled with easily their best production to date and some truly audacious swerves in the content. Flummox proved that they were ready for the nastiest edges of the metal scene, where progress will come by any means necessary. I mean, I told you this was coming, and not without some caveats here either. Somber is the sort of act where his career feels both more established and a little more precarious than it is. A lot of excellent production, a mainstream run with multiple great charting hits, and a strong breakup album debut in order to back it up. There's thematic consistency here, but this is also trusting the industry to handle some of artistic development that is desperately needed and keep Somber from falling back into his own worst instincts as a pop star. The sort of act that might need to be saved from himself, if you catch my drift. I'm also not fully convinced that there is more depth beyond that one breakup. I'd be happy to hear it. But when the peerless showmanship can seize the moment with some excellent sonic instincts behind him, at least for a little while on one album, Somber proved to be one of the best breakouts in the mainstream in 2025, where greater dimension could come with time and refinement. That sophomore album is going to be make or break. Let's see what happens.
Come to my side, we got hot dogs and we keep all all promises. You got your mama's Honda, your daddy's jaundice. Never really kept you from being honest, baby. Don't be scared of nothing.
I did not review every Jesse Wells album that dropped this year. Not sure how folks are really counting the whole TikTok compilations, but even outside of those, he put out 3 full-length projects, and the last one got a number of remixes, with this being the Midsummer Transition, where he tried to add more orchestration and southern flavor to his sound with some extremely solid results. It doesn't always pay off its potential. Jesse Wells' biggest issue is that he doesn't let his compositions or ideas really cook through quite long enough, especially with his guest stars here. So ideas can come across as kind of underthought or exposed too quickly. But it works more often than not because of that diffuse searching vibe, where the easy answers aren't quite leaping to hand when he digs deeper into the systemic rot around America. At least some of the roots survived, and with some of his most diverse songs to date, yeah, it's not going to be the only occasion that he makes this list. Warning in advance. As one of the more notable singer-songwriters of 2025, sometimes for all the wrong reasons, at least here, I think it's deserving. I can hear the argument that this is the best album Deafheaven have released since Sunbather, easily their most thematically complex and robust album, where if you want to say it is their best, I'm not sure I would disagree. It's a more song-focused explosion of soaring yet cacophonous atmospheric black metal with a brutal interrogation of the isolating experience of building and wielding power, cycles of familial violence, machismo, and an exploration of Nietzschean nihilism and power dynamics that is actually sober enough to puncture its grandeur when needed. Yet truthfully, it was not a black metal album that I revisited as much as I wanted to throughout the course of 2025. I said at the time of my review, there was more in the genre this year I liked more. They just hadn't fully refined the song-focused cuts to pay off some of the strongest moments. But if there is an act that shocked me by proving they have a greater depth to reach after a decade where I've been wary or outright disbelieving, Deafheaven proved it. And also it is one of the most critically acclaimed albums of 2025. Can't say the critics were that wrong with this one.
You're missing peace of mind. Oh, I hope you finally find you're missing peace of mind.
I truly believe that to fully contextualize the experience of Jason Isbell's album this year, it's on the list and higher, we're gonna get to it, you need the other side of the story. And Amanda Shires delivered not just the devastating counterpoint to everything he said, but also revealed enough truth in both of their stories that I wound up respecting more of them both. For Amanda Shires, it's a more reckless untangling of emotions and personal affairs, where rebounds flail and you sink into your own vices as you try to extinguish any remaining feelings. The sort of very messy breakup album where you can only be witness to a lot of questionable decisions, but know they are decisions that will help them heal by the very end. There's catharsis and pathos. Again, I'd argue Shires' music is being held back by some production from being as cutting or potent as it could be, especially with this writing, but the rough edges, they largely work on Nobody's Girl. It's hard to watch this album live up to its title, especially when you know that she'll be given far less grace, but in owning the mess and coming up better on the other side, at least she can sleep.
Wake up with a voice in my head to get cooked and fed to my feet, to get up out of bed on the beat of a new day. Molasses in the walk, with the gases in the talk. Give me the fuel, I'm a hawk ready to get the worm from out the New York City apples I earn. Rotten to the core, you can never ignore a front and the shock that you get hearing Fly Fresh spit.
How De La Soul was going to follow in the loss of Dave was always going to be a question. Truthfully, I had no expectations that De La Soul would ever be back after the Anonymous Nobody in 2016 was an underappreciated bit of very challenging and weird hip-hop 9 years ago. Turns out the way to do it was just wind back the clock just enough for the living legends to retake the stage and not just make a deliberate metatextual tribute, but also deliver a very old-fashioned but deliriously fun throwback. The first De La Soul album that feels like they're playing just to their comfort zone, but it's such a rich comfort zone where it's hard for me to care. I had a lot of fun. It's an unbelievably charming listen that probably runs a little bit too long, especially in the back half, and feels less like a farewell, more like charting a possible new path. A reclamation of laurels long denied them that's so playful and fun that proves the legends still got it, and sometimes that's enough. They stop, Dave stops. They're not about to let their brother down. The album being legit great alongside that, it's just gravy.
Uncle said, nigga, you must be sick. All you talk about is just get rich. Choke my neck, nigga, and ice my bitch. Beat the system with chains and whips.
This is culturally inappropriate.
Oh, I know a whole lot of people are going to be surprised that the other older hip-hop group reclaiming their laurels in 2025 after some personal tragedy is this low on this list, especially given all the critical acclaim in which they have been showered. And I don't want to undersell how great this Clipse album is. I really loved it. It's not Hell Hath No Fury, but what is? It still is my favorite rap song of 2025, and Malice and Pusha T prove that they have not lost a step in terms of coke bars, vicious flexing, a plain-spoken brutality in this framing, and the introspection that comes with middle age and way too many years in the game. If only everything else around this front-loaded album was that spectacular. The fragmented song structures, a lot of Pharrell's vocal contributions being, well, sadly matched by some of the mixing and mastering problems of this album, comparable quality across the board, or just a couple bars that are getting a pass because it's Clipse and they really shouldn't be getting a pass. Don't get me wrong, it was awesome watching this duo reassert their cultural presence while flaunting how inappropriate it was trying to be. It's why it's on this list as a great album, but we should be real in sorting it out. All I'm saying. I can argue this is Florence and the Machine's most challenging and ambitious album to date, possibly even their best, drawing influence from Swans for a heavier, more primal focus in the grooves and subject matter. Hell, it was certainly better than what Swans did this year, alongside Florence Welch delivering a monstrously effective performance. Everybody's Scream is trying to thread a very difficult needle in between pagan feminism and anthemic mainstream accessible hooks, including some stabs at the music industry, where you can tell some revealingly didn't show off that well in their appraisal of this album. The production's not what it needs to be to really make this their best. Aaron Dessner's a good choice, but not exactly one where you might need Kurt Ballou or John Congleton to actually go for broke. But since at least High as Hope, Florence and the Machine have been on one hell of a run that's strangely gone less recognized despite the titanic volume, and this felt all the more fiercely relevant than ever. Everybody scream indeed. And here, the Scream turned to sheer ecstatic fervor. And probably the biggest surprise for me is that Agriculture wound up on this list, let alone this high. I was not as crazy about that self-titled debut as some were, but the spiritual sound turned its jarring juxtaposition of high-minded Zen existentialism with queer workaday experience into a slice of discordant, dissonant nightmare fuel, which nevertheless feels stirring in the communal embrace. None of this is new. It's likely going to get worse. You are right to feel rage and pain and seek some sort of disconnection, even if it might only be available to those with the blinkered and privilege, but solace could be found with others who see on that same brink. It's roiling and jagged and balancing out its softer atmospherics with thunderous crescendos. Agriculture only amplified the sharp expanse across their sound, damn near found transcendence along the way. This was one of the biggest surprises for me in 2025, and I don't think it should have been. Hayden Pettigo's American primitivist and experimental guitar work alongside ambient soundscapes, that just seems built for all of my niche interests in these subgenres. But this is the first point where it feels like the more expanded instrumentation and the atmosphere really coalesced into these pensive, expansive, yet deeply earnest and meticulous scenes and soundscapes. The sort of instrumental project that feels like a long exhale that has you looking in the empty middle distance. Genuinely wish that collaboration with Chat Pile felt like more than the sum of its parts, but on his own, Pettigo crafted a uniquely yearning texture that was so very potent. This is getting a lot of critical acclaim in some certain circles, and for once, it feels so justly earned.
I know my mother tongue real good. But that ain't in the world that I live, just the world that I always daydream of. Speaking in code, got my grandmother nose and my motherfucking feet up. And the roosters and hands in my eardrum. I listen to them when I need to feel some in my soul.
This was a very late arrival in 2025, but if Red Veil isn't more on your radar in underground hip-hop as a producer, rapper, even singer, he should be. Sankofa was the project that showed all of that off with some rock-solid melodic foundations and flows that Red Veil could also construct a more interesting and challenging picture, as his come-up continues to brush against a lot of fame, and yet he's also acutely aware of going back and giving back to where he came. A love letter to his inner child that feels both deeply emotive and personal, but also willing to consider some pretty high-minded geopolitical scenes and more intimate struggles with mental health in and around him that really did get to me. The back half of this album's exploration specifically of mental illness feels both tender and realized with such candor and detail that it speaks to a grounded, emotive intelligence that just goes beyond his years that I really love. It's not my place to feel proud of Red Veil's come up. He did all this work across the board on his own, and there's still more work to do and he knows it, but Sankofa shows that his potential's even deeper than I expected, and he should be really way more on everyone's radar.
When I saw the world from up on your shoulders, I remember the view. When you live like we do, death doesn't leave with the best part of you.
Okay, look, it's not quite what Turnpike Troubadours did in the 2010s, few things are, but it's such a ridiculously consistent return to form after A Cat in the Rain, settling into age with more measured consideration and themes that are sharply aware of their limitations, but are willing to try and work and be the best within them. It's really damn hard for me to complain when it's this great. The sort of warmly organic red dirt country that really should command far more of the market share than it does. But it's also a more considered release that rewards a lot of patience and a more sober second listen, where, yeah, they're not reinventing the wheel, but if this list is anything to go by, that's no inhibitor of quality or its placement. The price of admission, it's gonna get paid, the hunt will get going before dawn, and Evan Felker and the rest of the band, they're finally back in motion. So yeah, I deeply love this, but it's time to let it rip once again. Y'all get on that.
Sailing away, feeling faded and I'm not okay. Sailing alone, staring by the stars and I can't get home now.
This album is a re-recording or a remastering for being in the top 10. I'm dead serious. I understand why James McMurtry opted for what sounds like a lot of live pickups to intensify some of that atmosphere, put you where he's actually performing, given the road is where he's making it the most these days. But you know what? A more refined recording, polish up some of the textures, and especially the vocal pickup, would do so many of these songs justice so much better, from the acoustic heartbreakers to the wry political jabs to the Texas Southern rock with a little bit more gnarled swing. James McMurtry will always get a lot of points for his poetry, but the compositions just feel way more varied and rambunctious in a lot of their texture and swerves, where The Wanderings will certainly keep you guessing. But even then, James McMurtry remains one of the great living poets of the past 30 or so years, with a few genuinely classic albums, and even if this isn't quite at that peak, the best songs ultimately win out. If The Wanderings keep bearing fruit like this, the harvest is bound to be bountiful. I said halfway through this year that I was really surprised by how much this became a comfort listen for me. And 6 months later, yeah, very little's changed. The advances that 256 Pi showed in song construction and transition and mix depth and mix balance handily made this one of the best electronic listens of the year for me. Certainly wears a lot of its influences on its sleeve, although again, I've hardly held that against a lot of records on this list and more to come, but the more times that I just enjoyed that thoughtful, textured scene, the more earnest heart was really on display. And if there is something that I'd like seeing more color in, well, real life, it would be the spirit that suffuses this album. It's truly underrated and excellent. You may have missed it, or you might want to go back to it, and you should.
Change the channel. The waves are making your face hurt. Make the most of it. Short days in a basement. Rebar in a nail pen. Breast milk in a green vial. Wet sheets in a corner. Asbestos is best before breakfast.
Not my favorite clipping album. The best moments, they come in the high concept middle ground between the icy throwback electronic grooves that call to mind some of those old cyberpunk novels and some of the more abstracted glitch, where it can transcend cyberpunk kitsch or cliche. But if there's an album that built up its replay for me over the course of 2025, it was this. It's the sort of project where it's so thematically robust and rich and dense in the frigid blend of sci-fi callbacks and references to cyberpunk to modern socio-political commentary, the clipping's own thorny web of Easter eggs across the past couple of albums, but where you can also tell just enough is missing to coax out a deeper reading, draw you back, have you poring over the fine details to see what deeper messages or memories can be gleaned. There is a tangled insularity in some of the storyline and the atmosphere, but when it's juxtaposed with the vibrant revolutionary humanity and Daveed Diggs just rapping his ass off, turns out to get on code, that was enough.
As I walk this wicked ground, keep me away from the devil's palm. I am the...
How dare you? I was shutting down the world and it scared you. Can't hold a girl down as this bad. Shade nice on my nose and my hairdo. Not the type that would trip off nostalgia. Too nice, but my silence is louder.
You know, I think this is probably my favorite Little Simz album, wherein Getting Away from Inflow, she made her most collaborative, but also her most explosive and uncertain album to date. A step away from easier, more poised respectability towards a deep well of righteous fury at the betrayal that has cost her so much, but also paired with a reconsideration of how to approach her craft, which forces a deeper level of introspection, and also her most varied and hard-hitting production to date. Little Simz has always been a great rapper, but this is the moment where you can tell that she really starts carving her own lane in the long road of healing and self-care. But Lotus not only shows how she won't be walking alone this time, it might lead to her most creatively potent work work to date. There's a bigger picture going on waiting just out of frame for Little Simz, but this was that necessary next step to get there. And after a few critically acclaimed albums that nevertheless kept me at a distance, where they felt a little more detached than they should be, a hungry Simbi, that's someone for who everybody should be taking notice.
They say you thugged out, gangsta, gangsta. Everybody bugged out, armed and dangerous, drained and drugged out. Anxious, ain't ya? Banged up banger, tell them bitches stop playing with us.
I'm convinced that within the bones of this album could well be the best album of 2025. I'm dead serious. After multiple re-listens going through the past several months, it feels so damn frustrating that following one of the strongest opening runs on any project in this year, it tilts into some higher concept genre experimentation that's just not quite as challenging or profound as it wants to be. And it's not because of talent or ambition. JID is the best rapper out of Dreamville right now. Suck it up, J. Cole stans. A credible star that deserves to be taken really seriously for that next leap. But maybe it's a guarded impulse or a hesitancy to really challenge his belief systems that he holds, for some introspection to see how much ugly God was willing to love. And even with that, JID is still an extremely impressive MC, and even the downturns here I wouldn't say are bad. If this is what folks are calling ugly, there's certainly plenty to like, especially this year. And that's the first half of our list. I'm trying to keep things moving in 2025. Let's not get too bogged down. This is going to be long enough as it is. And all these albums I have reviewed at some length. Reviews you should all go find an excuse to watch if you're curious for a lot more details. And given that there are some albums here you might not know, that's worth checking out. Now on to the second half of this list. Number 25. This is the sort of album where I'm paradoxically grateful that I got to it very late in the year, because while I think its low-key approach would have had a credible shot to stick with me over many more months, a little more proximity ensures that I can answer the album's title a bit more assuredly.
Every first draft during a fever dream, all-seeing being a bursting seam. The ship sailed, in fact careened. Second shift of a closed-down factory wasn't formed nor function. Public simply lacked the need. Focused on your opus, Mr. Forrest tracking out the trees. I won't adorn my words with beauty, please. My characters can't eat from bread of gold, living off bread alone. Food for thought, absent-minded, sketch the vision never shown.
Full disclosure, I did not have a chance to get to the 3 projects that Shrapnel released in the summer of this year. The lyric sheets, they weren't provided or disclosed, and 3 dense albums in a year, it's a lot to work through, especially in 2025 when I was shorter on time than most years. Thankfully, I still managed to finally swing back around and tap into Prem Rock's solo effort from earlier this year and felt profoundly rewarded by it. When he's not playing foil, his subtlety and New York swagger shows greater range against the broadly textured, grimy scenes, where the hooks and bars, they're low-key until they're not. For a project that explores endings in frank, haggard detail, it's one that's willing to take stock in a lot of smaller moments, cherish the freedom that comes with actually putting in the work in the art and hoping the messages are received by the very end. The bars are terrific, the grooves absolutely knock, and more fine details spill out with every repeated listen. I did indeed enjoy my time here. I think I might stay a little while longer. Number 24. I don't have a lot of regrets about certain year-end lists, especially in the 2010s where I reserved it to just 25 albums. As much as I feel like I miss so much any given year, a list of that length can still feel more than enough, especially when I'm trying to write as quickly as I can and assemble these in what essentially should be my holiday. But when I look back on 2016, I don't think I regret not putting Glory Days by Little Mix on that list. It would have had some steep competition in a really good year for a top 50. That album has real flaws too, but coming into 2025 with this, it's nice to set some things right.
You'll never know how much I love you till my crazy comes out. Till you 6 feet underground. I'm sorry, but you're mine now. Till I squeeze your heart right out. I'm sorry, but you're mine now.
So I'm not surprised that Perry's self-titled debut didn't get a lot of attention outside of the UK with what's left of Little Mix's fandom. Most of us chose to back Jade's album instead, which, despite my many problems with it, it's certainly a cooler album for pop stands to like in a year like this. But what Perry lands for me is rock-solid compositions and production, so often missed in her mid-2010s era of pop, and enough earnest explosiveness to deliver a throwback to a time with both more and less nostalgia than you might think, where divas could flex their huge presence amidst driving grooves accented by some acoustic guitar before the entire genre tilted into the dreary trap side. It's strident, it's full force with hooks for days. But Perry also brought some welcome maturity into her Kiss Off to New Love journey, where it feels like the authentic evolution of that era's sound rather than just playing it for a full throwback, where the only thing missing for me was, well, the rest of Little Mix in order to add up the harmonies, drive them home. In the meantime, this was by far not the coolest pop album of 2025, but it was absolutely a welcome surprise and a personal favorite. Y'all may have missed it. I think it's worth another shot. Number 23. I know this project's gonna top a lot of year-end lists, and there's a part of me that wants to rail on the critic industrial complex of being a little bit too easy to sucker in, with grand neoclassical flourishes and epic bombast, with a high concept juxtaposition, ambition to sell it across many languages to amplify its feeling of universality. I mean, there's a part of me that feels like you add just enough orchestration, it can become the mainstream music equivalent of Oscar bait. But it's not like I can't appreciate a certain grandeur in the craft. I don't think I've ever been fully on board with Rosalia, and despite how much I really like Lux, I still don't think I'm all the way there. Mostly because this album is walking a very delicate balance and showcasing human heartache and pseudo-religious angst with the scale in order to match it. I'm not about to call it style over substance, although there are some who have, where there is a significant amount of ambition in both this and across about half of this album, where she absolutely sticks the landing with gorgeously arranged neoclassical art pop, but said balance can also lead to a fair few songs feeling compositionally or thematically underdeveloped or abbreviated, or just not the best possible utilization of her pop songwriting chops. Especially when the split across the human and divine, it is a theme that Rosalia has tackled before. It was across Motomami. Now this is easily her most high-minded album, and there's enough striking resonance for it to be indeed legit great, one of the best of 2025, but I'm still convinced her Stairway to Heaven remains a bit longer. Deserving of plenty of acclaim, even if those who speak more Spanish might not be as impressed. I've seen those reviews, but if she takes those challenging ideas further, oh, that might be an ecstasy worth tasting. Number 22. On the flip side, this is an act who actually was on the experimental fringe, and then this year delivered his most pop-friendly album to date, where it seems like most of the critical establishment passed him by. I got the feeling they should all go swing back around for a second look or listen. Let's call it a gut feeling.
Your mentality, baby, you come down to eat it now. I'm a spring cut to his lips, slip into my lips.
This was the year I finally got into Will Weisenfeld's Baths, the artist, not the self-care routine, I prefer showers. And this was a truly wonderful introduction, an album shunning the desire to overthink it and instead go from impulses that are more raw and unkempt, sweaty and carnal, and actively pushing him outside of his comfort zone. And it forces more difficult questions as a result from going there. It was hard not to consider this album directly alongside Perfume Genius this year, not only for their off-kilter pop sensibilities, but in contrast, this is looking to take a more challenging look at a respectability that could be embraced, but it's also the stark reality how his situation doesn't even make attaining it likely. It feels more grounded in a queer scene that's more lived in and precarious, where the yearning might come in hot and deep and heavy, and even if it's not at all pleasant or respectable, the truth can still build tremendous resonance. Coupled with some wild contorting production that's both more organic and tuneful than you would expect, where if it's gonna be accessible, it's going there its own way. Yeah, I'm gonna stick with all the puns. A gut punch in the best way possible. Number 21. Okay, look, it is his weakest album. The fact that it's only just outside the top 20 should tell you a lot.
She said, I don't ever wanna see you like that. I guess I ain't got a choice but never turn back. Fill my soul with solid gold. I'm complete, I'm whole. All I know is where you go, I will go, I will.
Ruston Kelly's fourth album is probably his most conventional in terms of subject matter and approach, but it's no less great for it. Where previous projects had his demons often overpower him or held just at bay, this is where he lands the body blows against them, takes more control, gets out of his own self-destructive myopia, and finds love and a truer happiness along the way, if only because he's actually allowing himself to be happy and find the rest of his life. And so much of the formula beneath it is still incredibly solid, if familiar. Jared Kay is back on production, an impeccable balance between the glossier synths and the country guitars, chock full of great hooks where, if there is a few more misfires along the way, I'd actually argue they come from some relative unfamiliarity with this emotive territory, being a little bit more content. And yeah, it is more sedate and comfortable, paradoxically his most accessible and mature album to date. And while the formula is now grown, again, rather familiar, and the returns are starting to diminish, it's not enough to remove a lot of that sheen of genuine greatness. I'm still seeing quality through that window. Let's see where going it all in actually takes him next. Number 20. I don't always go by the adage that the album you play the most is the best of any given year. Sometimes you only hear something later in the year and you just won't have the chance to get the listens in that you might want. More on that later. On the flip side, I have had this for the vast majority of 2025, if only picked up more flair and charm throughout the course of the summer. It's had remarkable shelf life and replay value for me.
Pistol pop, gunshot. Today I pray for you. Balls in my word, all I got. I won't break them for you. Don't stop, don't stop. Why would he ever do it? Granny said he'll be good. Yeah. You ain't gotta tell me twice. She called.
Okay, a part of me wants to say it is too easy. Saba's bars and storytelling have picked up a lighter touch and tone over the years. It's not gonna be for everyone. He's become more playful and conscious, with more smooth humor and charm in his arsenal. So why not give him a selection of beats exclusively from one of the best ever producers in rap music? And maybe it's all a little bit too breezy and conversational, maybe a little bit too low-key for the charm to really pop off, especially in comparison with albums that were trying a lot harder. Maybe you're wishing that he went a little deeper, didn't quite wear some of his influences so obviously and prominently. It really had me yearning for another Fonte project. But every listen, you realize that when you set up some lower stakes, you need to be able to convey relaxation and fun to compensate. And goddamn does Saba stick that landing. He is way more compelling with cool than with angst or trying to be the next J. Cole, especially when the grooves are so good that I'd rather listen to this than anything Cole has ever done. This is a hip-hop hangout album for the decade that manages to really sneak up on you in the best ways possible. I am shocked that it stuck in the private files for so long, because it really is something special. Number 19. So one regret I have in 2025 is that I just did not have the sort of time to spend on Bandcamp that I wanted. My streaming series bandwidth stopped earlier this year because I just got caught up in way too much stuff IRL. Until I've got a proper streaming setup in place, it's gonna be on hiatus. Not sure if/when it will return. But if there was a few acts that I discovered in that series, and this was probably the best.
Can you feel it coming? Can you?
Floodlights Underneath feels like the album that is priming this Australian band for the biggest stage. A little bit less political than their previous albums, but it hasn't gone away, and replacing it with a greater sense of optimistic introspection, more diverse orchestration from post-punk infused indie rock with something closer to more grandeur, and hooks for goddamn days. I love the interplay between the singers. I love how the jagged guitars build to such striking crescendos. I love how their frontman is channeling that overthinking baritone of this subgenre for a lot more earnest firepower. And if the production was a little bit better in refining the mix dynamics, I would say they would have that stage thoroughly in hand and we would be in Album of the Year territory. As it is, in a year where I think rock often struggled to find its footing, this was the shot in the arm that actually came from the underground in the best way possible, or should I say from underneath. Number 18. The odd thing as a critic approaching certain acts late is that the term is kind of variable. You're often ahead of the mainstream public by months, if not years, but lateness is relative. Sometimes for an act like Bats, it can be an act that you've just never had the chance to properly explore, get around to, and appreciate. And they've been active for a decade, so you got a back catalog to work through. And then you have the cases where the timetable's much shorter because they've had some success very early on and become a favorite for some of those in the know, but they needed that extra spark of refinement to properly put them into contention.
What do you do when a good man cries? And you're the one to keep him up at night. How could you do what you said you wouldn't do like all the other guys?
CMAT's breakthrough in 2025 felt both wonderful and had me a bit worried simultaneously. Follow me on this. On the one hand, it's very clear if we're looking for fiery women with huge voices, conscious and confrontational lyrics, and a knack for provocation in the wake of Chappell Roan's mainstream breakthrough, CMAT feels like she can deliver that and more, with a wildly colorful album spanning glossy pop and country, with some more challenging framing and writing that is designed to court and offend any gaze or standard. And make no mistake, she's got the talent and the gusto to make that work. I was won over on that theatricality. On the other hand, there's a lot of anxious darkness underscoring Euro country. For as much as the precarious scenes amplify all that tension, they also feel a little too close to comfort, maybe to home, where I'm left wondering if CMAT's actually okay getting out the other side, especially as she's more acutely aware than any how the music industry is gonna try and treat her. Now, this album surges into that instability. It is genuinely awesome, where I am thrilled to be joining that bandwagon. But if the only crash that happens is the Tesla, she's gonna be way better for it. Number 17. You can argue that Aesop Rock's been on a generational run since at least Spirit World Field Guide. Some might go as far back to 2016's The Impossible Kid. I don't think I'd blame you. Malibu Ken's awesome, especially when he is this prolific at this point of his career. I mean, he's not about to stop now.
Plate spinner off a late dinner, one falling plate away from a date with the plague bringer. One away from drugged up in a cage, or all the fun in the world succumb to sudden malaise when a ship coming with a running rudder bug and sail sliced up. Somebody, would you mind if I cut in? I would have been the young, wild, and stubborn, but honestly, the current version might invite the up end.
One thing you might not mention amidst his ridiculously tight wordplay and Aesop Rock only growing more expressive as a performer and producer is that he thrives in talking about what's in the spaces between the established or expected and what he describes. Integrated Tech Solutions in 2023 was less about the tech itself, more about the human or just plain inexplicable things that it can then transcend it. How it bends around those solutions inwards and around them, and Black Hole Superette is the sequel, well, semi-sequel, that feels like it's even better, albeit darker. This is an album confronting the uncanny systems that try to bend us to their frame, where Aesop Rock is more aware than most that those with the most power are those who made the roads. But he's also someone who never quite fit neatly into those systems if they worked at all. And even for the points of comfort where he does, he relishes the magic to swerve, become unquantifiable. It also helps that it's one of the more collaborative collaborative projects amidst fellow outsiders. Every guest delivers. They seem to know the purpose of a project like this. And you always hear a turn of phrase or story on an album like this that's unlike anything else you'll hear possibly ever. You can skip over that underwhelming selection of B-sides he dropped later in this year. This was the project where that late night routine became a strange adventure, and I'm happy to be along for the ride. Number 16. So this was a year where it was very easy to wallow in misery. Even if having a great year, it was in no short supply. So I was looking for words, ideas, aiming higher, stir the heartstrings, make me laugh. I did not expect his turnaround to be so fast from last year, but man, I'm thrilled we got it.
By Big Bud Billy, Big Bud Billy. Where'd they ever get those tiny little britches on? Well, good God Almighty, hell Satan, I've never seen a finer they them than Big Bud Billy.
I feel like I was late to Willie Carlisle last year with Critterland, but while that album might be a shade more consistent or ambitious, Winged Victory is what I really needed in 2025. More warm and vibrant arrangements that span everything from bluegrass to polka to Celtic folk, naturalistic and playful in its framing, but no less fervent in some of its aspirations, be they queer, leftist, or just leaving everyone with a rollicking damn great time. There is deeper pathos here, and it brought me back. But what drew me more month over month was a sense of humor, paired with the genuine fearsome pen to match it, where it's got a bit of the bard's touch with the jokes that are bawdy, and you absolutely get them the first time and laugh, and then with every following listen you find another one, and laugh even harder. To keep it simple, it is an album that brings pure, multifaceted joy. That's a victory that's worth celebrating. Number 15. But at the same time, sometimes you need someone to stare in the face of that darkness, spit truth to power, years after they've been away, but returning with the frighteningly vibrant poetry and dynamics which made them.
It's a ladder, not a pyramid. We'll pull you up along. You'll be the base of our foundation here. We're only building up.
So this is another case where this album could have been among the very top of 2025 if it wasn't for a couple structural hang-ups, and I hate to say that. Its best moments are certainly contenders, with the sort of wide-angle storytelling that expands from a very personal, dark breakdown to the small Michigan town overtaken by exploitative business and religion around this person, to the capitalistic system at large, to the horrifying reality that nobody with power has a true answer or escape, especially within the monstrous systems that they have assembled or have corrupted to their advantage, but never to their transcendence. It's the feel of being trapped, and as you break out of each successive wall and you lose a little more for it, not only do the walls get higher, but the distance to get to them gets even further. If only it hadn't been somewhat clumsily split across multiple EPs, then amalgamated together, where there are gaps in the production style or compositional approach that only mostly connect together. A tighter edit with more closely tied together to that personal stakes might have put this on another level. Now, it's still a lot to dispute back with this bittersweet vengeance, and you know what? Sometimes that's all you need. It's worth a revisit, if a harrowing one. Number 14. The biggest surprise for me in 2025, I had no expectations. I don't think anyone saw this coming for his first album in 9 years. Even if it was a genre swerve, I didn't expect it would be like this.
That's when I lost my way. You lit the light in, and in the dark you pulled me through. So I can't lose you when I'm close to losing faith. You have been fighting. There in your eyes I see the truth. I can't lose you.
Songs for a New Moon is not fully unique in 2025 and that it feels like an album from a different time. But what's truly special is that if you took this back about 40 years, you could rewrite history because it's loaded to the gills with some of the best pop and soft rock that could have dropped in the mid-80s. Give these songs to Huey Lewis or Fleetwood Mac or Toto or, I don't know, like The Police or maybe even Foreigner, you'd have a new set of standards where it almost feels like a note-perfect covers album of forgotten classics. And then you actually get the covers of The Killers and Cyndi Lauper to put it over the top for me. Charles Kelly proves that his weathered charisma is such a natural fit for this era. The production is top-notch, where I actually had a friend highlight that the Melodyne had been swapped out for a little bit more reverb. It would only feel more era appropriate, but it's got the nice side effect for me now of not solely feeling like a throwback to the 80s, and the writing is way better than it has any right to be, taking a lot of the country singer-songwriter polish and bringing it to a stage that feels way more natural and appropriate and mature. I'd call it the most slept-on album of 2025, but the better framing is that it's the most ignored. For every description, this is the sort of album to get a critic's eyes to roll back into their skull and then pass it by, and I did not make that mistake, and wow, one hell of a pleasant surprise and a journey. Number 13. At one point, this album was much higher on my list, but it's a stark case of when the artist formula gets exposed more and more with time. I gradually cooled on it, but just a little, because in terms of discoveries in 2025, this was something special.
We'll keep spinning on. Turn and turn me on. We'll keep spinning on. Turn and turn me on.
Yes, I've heard the argument, Patchwork is a better project, and I've also seen the backlash play out to Jesse Wells in real time, to a few dashed off TikTok compositions that desperately needed some more time to cook and give everyone the worst possible first impression, that he was more mercenary or a phony or just chasing a cheap formula for the success, where the oversaturation of his releases did not help him this year. Hell, if I really wanted to be mean, the sharper comparisons not to Bob Dylan at all, who if you know Bob Dylan's catalog and don't just worship it, he could be hit with a few of these same barbed critiques himself. The worst comparison to Jesse Wells is Barry McGuire, whose doomsaying and poetry could feel overwrought without the depth to back it up. But Middle, to me, was the best glorious exception to all those rules. It's more thematically focused, a little bit more introspective, where a lot of the angst can be juxtaposed with his musings and feel more earned, and where the folk and country arrangements, they actually feel a little more developed and song-focused in order to sell it. I'd argue that, again, he's his own worst enemy when it comes to managing a lot of his own release timeline, but there are enough critics who wrote him off on the basis of just one song, and they should know better. But when I open up this list pleading for solidarity, it is the wrong time for that call out to be better. But you know what, at least for a little, I'm inclined to come down to the middle. Meet him where he's at. Number 12. It's been a while since I've had to put a disclaimer for a release on this list, but here it goes. I've met this artist, I've worked with her in a video unrelated to a review or this list in the past 18 months, but I've also loved her artistry the past 5 years, and her steady ascent has been thrilling to see. So while I cannot quite call this her most visceral project, it's her most considered and thoughtful. Precisely the leap she needed.
I hear the speakers are pulling back the fuck up. Back the fuck up. Back the fuck up. Back the fuck up.
Across the early 2020s, Backwash proved that there was nobody quite like her in her hip-hop infused with trap metal and industrial metal, where you could immediately buy into the grimy, unforgiving reality of the scene in which she painted. But in 2025, where she seems a half step away from the abyss, but she also knows how precarious the ascent has been, and she can fall back so quickly, this is the album where not only has her melodic strengths been amplified for more challenging and layered hip-hop production, passion, but also where her challenges are more thorny and more complex. Not just the survivor's guilt, but also those close to you seeing your previous art and then being unnerved or heartbroken by it. It pushes her to take a bigger lens outside of herself. Because while those insecurities exist, she can hear a community and solidarity that could help her should she backslide. And it's one of the reasons why the more collaborative closing title track feels so stirring. It's earned. And there is an album that makes my list damn near every year where I don't quite revisit it as much as I would like to throughout the course of the year, especially when I get really busy. And I gotta go back and be immediately reminded of its immense quality. This was that album in 2025. It's far more than dust that remains here. Number 11. There have been more than a few albums on this list that might have slipped out for me due to a rather unique phenomenon, the paratext around them. That meaning the art and the commentary that's built up around in their wake. Not that they haven't held up, the quality's still absolutely there, but the flaws might be more evident. This is arguably the biggest case of it that had nudged him out of the top 10, which I could have never predicted given that his last major release was my favorite of 2023. It's among the very limited list of the best albums of the 2020s so far, but this is still special.
And I was a gravel weed and I needed you to raise me. I'm sorry the day came when I felt like I was raised. And now that I live to see my melodies betray me, I'm sorry the love songs all mean different things today.
Jason Isbell tried to write his way out. There is an instability to this album that you can't quite escape, even as he's trying to contextualize a lot of the scant answers and emotions that he's feeling. When you're caught up in the wake of it, there is a misconception that the best art gets made, and truthfully, that's never really the case. The same bad argument that gets artists to make their greatest work in poverty or hard times, when in reality, material support lets them create and refine more easily. Get this pseudo-Calvinist tortured artist bullshit out of here. As such, it's impossible for me to not hear Foxes in the Snow and ignore the other side of the coin that I've already mentioned, that being Amanda Shires' Nobody's Girl. This is the better album for me, but more in the spare, meticulous craft, only somewhat the content. As such, I hear Jason Isbell's very human flaws, and it's not always guaranteed to make his work better. Less so in the breakup, more in the rebound. The album advocates for self-care and reflection, taking a nap, and probably should take some of its own advice. But still, one of the greatest songwriters of this era of country, he delivered a fractured and challenging album in one of the most tumultuous moments in years of his life, where his pedestal should be broken and dismantled for his own good, if only for so the humanity underneath can be better explored. And this winds up all the special for it. Let's hope it lasts. Number 10. And you know, speaking of artists in an understated yet painfully introspective lane who feel built on the weight of history and culmination, where fragmentation and memory might be the key, wonder if at some point he went back to actually get that reference.
I got all you niggas' voices in my skull. Introspective writing, street chase technician. I got all you niggas' voices in my skull. Polymath observer, hood museum exhibit. I got all you niggas' voices in my skull.
So here's a little bit of irony with this. I saw Open Mike Eagle's stream taking a listen at Pitchfork's list of the top songs of 2025, and he heard a Jason Isbell song from Fox in the Snow, and he ducked out of it pretty quick. Just didn't seem to be for him, which I will understand. Wasn't the best choice on that album from Pitchfork, because it's Pitchfork, what the hell do you expect? But I found it a little bit ironic because Neighborhood Gods Unlimited had a similar feel of being caught up in the wake and then parsing through the fragmented wreckage yet culmination, made all the more challenging amidst the unspooling cacophony of the modern internet. It's the album where I felt the most stark kinship with Open Mike Eagle as a creator, a person in this whirling, often deeply polluted space, a panopticon where we might all find an answer for a time that works, but we never fully coalesce. because human beings don't coalesce, where you can feel paralyzed when you catastrophize, and how is that not a rhyme he would use? Sup, Mike? I know you would appreciate some of the wordplay. In any case, this is his best since Anime, Trauma, and Divorce, building on a storied legacy where I'd argue he's got at least 3 classic albums, 4 if anyone would listen to me and admit that Hella Personal Film Festival is one of them, and yet, with every project feels a little bit more easy to connect with and empathize, because I can feel and hear those voices too. What the fuck is self-care anyway? Shouldn't have to add more. This is one of the most challenging rap albums of 2025, most challenging albums of this year, and consequently one of the most underrated. It deserves so many more listens, beyond just the neighborhood. Number 9. So I always keep an eye on where my favorite albums from the front half of any given year fall in comparison with the back half. It's not an exact science when making these lists, but in general they tend to actually cluster around the midpoint of any given year, usually with the top spot being occupied with a record that I heard in the first half of the year. Indeed, you need to go back about a decade to find a case where the top album came from the latter half of a given year. Maybe some of that has to do with release scheduling, or the time you actually have in order to listen and fully contextualize and come to love something, be it enough to truly grow on you or shrink. It's a difficult balance. 2025 is an exception. The back half of this year dominates my top list. It's not particularly close. If you checked out halfway through this year and you're only back to watch this list, there hasn't been much overlap. And yet sometimes you manage to amplify a winning formula and it lasts, and it goes so damn well for it. Every time Sewer justifiably claims a spot on my year-end list, I kind of struggle to find more words to express and describe why. It feels like I've been repeating myself since 2016. It's the sort of atmospheric black metal infused with gloriously organic folk textures that go ridiculously hard. Where if Origins in 2022 was a bit of a small misstep because the transitions weren't fully there, Amidst the Ruins fixes that and then some, and it's probably their best album to date. The melodies and crescendos are just cinematic. This is absolutely the sort of album that establishes a brand new standard for them, though. I know that nobody really pays as much attention as they should to the lyrics in black metal, for as backwards looking as Sewer's celebration of history and heritage can be, thankfully treading away from the blood and soil types who would salivate over the chance to co-opt music like this, I would certainly appreciate their poetry getting a little deeper, more challenging only of themselves. You can only go to the past so many times before the urgent future starts screaming for attention. Either way, this is the sort of album where epic is the obvious descriptor, and it can be embraced without irony. Utterly glorious. Number 8. What can I say? It's nice to be early to the party, even if you felt a little behind at the time, because being there for the breakout moment, it's worth it.
Need a girl called a little simple undress. I want the rain instead of dancing in the sunset. Honestly, I'm obsessed. Can I get you undressed? Baby, 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 baby.
I don't think you can argue that Nourished by Time saw a justly deserved breakout in 2025, where if Erotic Probiotic 2 was on the year-end list for those in the know in 2023, The Passionate Ones is everywhere, and for damn good reason, as Marcus Brown takes his shaggy blend of hypnagogic pop and 80s R&B and freestyle and buffs it to a major sheen, where the passion and force of personality is both his greatest strength and weakness, and he knows that. And he's gonna deconstruct and untangle every lightly twisted layer of it. The survivalist political themes, how to keep going under late capitalism, they're all still here and are vital, but he's wise enough to show the agonizing reality where that sort of passion and vigor and emotional intensity can be alienating as much as it is thrilling. And the moments of heartbreak and very flawed angst across this album are tremendously humanizing, especially when you lose and realize that some of that passion can be demanding, projecting ego. It's a fascinating and dense album, but with such style and incredible texture and great hooks that I found more to love with every single listen. I was worried about him signing to XL, but he proved that he didn't lose an inch along the way, and we're all the better for it. Number 7. There are many albums on this list where calling them the comeback of the year would not only be understandable, but rather justified. But at least for me, if you know the story, this is where it feels the most appropriate.
Take me, I can feel my soul below me, and it looks like down is up the photograph, and it took a while to see that all the lives before me was like water in the rain. When I packed my bags and drove to San Francisco in the pouring rain.
After the tragic death of their drummer and the extremely difficult reality for a niche progressive metal band in the independent scene to recapture momentum, it would be believable if we never got another project from Moron Police. So for Pachinko to not only be here, but a dazzling, dense, utterly glorious, high-concept expansion of their sound is damn close to magic. The biggest trick with Moron Police is that they can be fundamentally kind of ridiculous. That's a compliment. But with melodic hooks for years, they find so much depth and pathos in that ridiculous storytelling, where the tale of a man getting reincarnated as a pachinko machine becomes an extended meditation on death, late capitalism, ego, and depersonalization, and then finally that fearful choice to move on to whatever might come next, where you really can't ignore the meta text of their drummer's passing in a lot of the emotional through line and undercurrents, but it's only a component piece of that thematic story, adding very personal stakes to an arc that is as utterly wild as this is. It's the best possible follow through to A Boat on the Sea in 2019, and while I could nitpick momentum nor some minor production hangups, I am more appreciative of the miracle that we got this at all, and it's easily the best metal album of 2025. You may not have heard it, you should. Number 6. Again, I keep referencing acts where I think critics have slept on their work in 2025, where I said on a previous list that I'm comfortable knowing that if said critics had actually given them the time, heard the albums, they would be hard-pressed to ignore giving them attention and praise. And I know it's impossible to hear anything in a given year, I'm a prime example of that, but if there's an album where there's less excuse than ever as to why it got overlooked,
But maybe you want this too. I look like the sun to you. Do I blaze freckles on your face? I bet I do.
Neko Case needs no introduction, even if it's her first solo album in 7 years. I mean, go back to Blacklisted and Fox Confessor in the 2000s, or Hell On, her criminally underrated 2018 album, where I first noticed critics not paying as much attention as you would expect given the other projects they might praise in a similar lane. So Neon Grey Midnight Green proves that she is in a class on her own. Her voice is tremendous, and while she's always been behind the boards in some way, some capacity before, taking full reign of the production into tapping into that galloping animalistic swell where she is capable of trampling everything and anything underfoot, where she is as much caught up in that wake which amplifies all the dynamics, even if my biggest nitpick is that she probably could have afforded to go even harder and she would have gotten away with it. But there's also a deeply considered and incredibly layered tenderness to a lot of its exploration of being a working artist in the modern day. I love the brand of metatext, it's me, but there's also a go for broke and distinctly feminine wildness in her process that's both considered and untamed, that loves too hard, and for every duel with her muse, she's willing to actually throw hands at men who would co-opt and abuse women for their art while denying them their agency, where unquantifiable magic can then be woven in its wake. If for some ungodly reason Last Dinner Party made your year-end list, or maybe even Florence and the Machine did mine, mine, you owe yourself the favor of a finer and more challenging spirit. Get on that. Number 5. One thing that gets extremely annoying as a critic in harrowing times is that you don't want to denigrate your peers. If you can't tell, I've been trying on this list. You want to be generous. You want to give room for people to grow with some challenging art. So watching the number of folks, professional or otherwise, categorically fall on their face when talking about this album and horrorcore and the artist's place in rap music and hip-hop itself in 2025, especially when it's the sort of revealing praise that shows their own ignorance, sometimes I gotta bite my tongue. That ends now.
12 billion USD hovering over the Gaza Strip. You don't wanna know what it costs to live, what it costs to hide behind eyelids. When your back turned, secret cannibals lick their lips, fingernails sharp. I snatch the lights out of cats so I can see in the dark, so I can see who you are.
This is Billy Woods' best album since probably Hiding Places. I can hear the argument for Maps or Ethiops, although Church is really the better choice with the latter in 2022. And in going darker for more thorny, challenging places, it was so damn frustrating to watch a certain audience utterly miss the point. This is not post-hip-hop or redefining horrorcore. Billy Woods has not broken your ability to appreciate other rap artists. If anything, this project is deeply entrenched in very long hip-hop traditions of using horror tropes to expose a street-level scene where there is a masterclass in creating tension and discomfort. These are traditions that go back to around when I was born. Were you not paying attention to every other time that Billy Woods has done it? Or the callbacks to acts who have done it all before him. If anything, what gives this album its power is how deeply human its nightmares can be, rooted in black revolutionary thought that raises dark questions of what you sacrifice of yourself to survive, what humanity you choose to amputate, how you might feed off of others and then be damned for it. Whether by taking the tools of the master you wind up perpetuating his rotten system, or subverting it to a deeply unstable future, or past, or the present. The cycles are in a constant nightmarish churn, especially when you know your loved ones are at stake within it all. I'm not saying folks are wrong for the praise of this album. It's a tremendous project and a storied catalog that deserves all the acclaim, but I challenge people to not stop here or hack off one act from hip-hop culture to place above the rest. Be better, think deeper, go outside, or look over your shoulder. Number 4. So I said very early on when assembling this list that we would get to a discussion of country music, and the unfortunate reality, I don't think country had a great year. There's more entries from that genre on my list than for the majority of my peers, but if I'm looking at a lot of what blew up in 2025, I'm just not nearly as impressed as I've been in the past. Some of that is on me. I didn't have the time to do certain deeper dives outside of the many I already knew. If there's a regret I have with this list, it's that I wasn't deeper into certain underground or indie scenes to mine more gold. And this might also be one such case, but it's not the country connection that makes this special.
I'm tired of holding on.
Cole Chaney took the sort of leap with this album that I quite frankly never saw coming. With his 2021 debut, Mercy was a punch in the gut of ragged Appalachian stories that were so raw and effective that it was one of the best albums of that year, but I could not have predicted this. Not just a gentle expansion and diversification of its sound with warmer textured and more burnished arrangements, but embellishments, especially in the vocal delivery, that are damn near 90s grunge or alt-rock, calling back to that era when that dabbled in roots music more than anyone seemed to remember. The edge is still here, but it's been tempered and refined. It's Cole Chaney finding a sound and making it his own. And for every raucous critic who throws all the flowers at MJ Lenderman and Wednesday to boot for their writing, I'm utterly bewildered why this was not on your radar. Truthfully, Cole Chaney might just fall into the Jason Eady camp of being a little bit too direct in his presentation, where it's doing its own distinct thing so goddamn well, you gotta be appreciating the fine details to hear what makes it so special. But this was the album that had my favorite song of 2025, and minus one deep cut that hit kind of an odd note was damn near my album of the year. It's not traditional or neo-traditional in country context, nor is it the easiest pure sell to alternative or classic rock fans, but in straddling the line between, in the shadow of that mountain, he found some gold in the pan. And y'all should hear it. Number 3. I've known in my gut since 2019 that when I first started covering her, she had the capacity to get to this point. The best songs of hers were absolutely there, just not quite consistently across the album. In 2025, she finally got it.
Wish I got to say, I wish I got to tell you, my heart breaks all the time too. I wish that you stayed, I wish I could show you the place where the light gets through.
And speaking of acts who weren't quite considered country enough by a certain subset, Carolyn Spence is absolutely pulling in some from indie pop and dreamier bootgaze textures for this album. It's why I consistently call what she does dream country instead of bootgaze, which is absolutely a great term that I wish I had coined and I don't really use out of spite, but it's the writing and song structure and thematic arc where Heart Go Wild took the biggest leap. Carolyn Spence's aching yet deeply mature and compelling husky delivery was always adding so much more subtle character to her stories, but now she's consistently got the robust tales to match it, from the crushingly intimate and very complicated breakup that opens up the album, to the new love that was then found and lost along the way, even to the reality of trying to explore all these emotions in the public eye, and there's always the question of authenticity in performance. Don't forget to turn the camera on. Where her previous albums saw some of that self-care journey, Heart Go Wild was living in its wake and feeling every sting all the deeper. With some of her most gorgeous soundscapes today, yeah, she took the leap. It's her best album, and one of the best country or pop country albums in this lane this year. Truly spellbinding. Number 2. Although, funnily enough, while we're on the topic of magic,
I got a blanket with me in the riding. I'll make it so my niggas never dying. Maybe escape if we take the skies in. I got a blanket with me in the riding. I'll make it so my niggas never dying. Maybe escape if we take the skies in.
this was my top album of 2025 nearly all goddamn year. And it was very weird because it felt very reluctant on my part, where I couldn't escape the, well, it's not better than For My Mama and anyone who looked like her, but it's got to compete with what's in front of it this year, where the biggest critique I had was that I wanted more. McKinley Dixon's rhyming and flow is top-notch, you know this. The jazz-inflected but still vigorously pummeling production returning to the looser live band feel from beloved Paradise Jazz was the best minor course correction for it, but his greatest skill is storytelling and thematic depth, saying so much within a compact package that you find yourself desperately searching for more to spur that imagination. The idea at the core of this album, black kids finding a way to resurrect one of their peers, it's inspired. It captures the delirious sense of play and the unquantifiable spirit that evokes its power, but then McKinley Dixon takes the next step and shows every cascading consequence of a newfound return, and had me think of a moment of Lin-Manuel Miranda for a similar vocal timbre, especially in the title track, but then followed with, I could watch and listen to a full 3-hour musical exploring every niche of this idea from McKinley Dixon. That's how much boundless potential and seamless atmosphere building that there is. But that's before we get to the layers of callbacks and meta commentary built on previous albums, which further ground the story and set the scene all the better, where McKinley Dixon has to reflect on the symbolism that comes with resurrection through art and the societal impact of his come up. I mean, it's a tour de force, where even if I think his 2021 album is stronger, it's a goddamn nitpick because my biggest complaint is that I wish this was just longer and we got more of it. The best rap album of 2025, I'm thrilled that he's finally getting flowers from nearly everyone finally getting on board. So what could be better? Finally, number 1. I go back to that slight reluctance I felt with Magic Alive, because I don't want it to come across like a backhanded compliment by saying when I heard this, I knew in my gut immediately it was my album of the year. It suddenly did not feel close, where for every deeper listen I gave it, with every bit of analysis, the challenging depth and hooks and grooves, they were also there and just kept on growing on me. I don't expect anyone else to share this number one pick. The album dropped in early December of this year, so the vast majority of people did not hear it as one would expect. And as of right now, I'm the only person who's reviewed it on Rate Your Music or YouTube. In terms of reviews across the internet as a whole, I don't even know if it's got double digits. So this will be as much a call to action to seek it out and actually hear this as it is to praise it. Because while I don't like saying which albums will define a given year or shape that given year, especially not one that dropped so late in 2025 and under the radar for so many, nothing felt more fiercely relevant and charged to 2025 than this.
I awoke the heart of hunger. If you listen, you will hear. Beating long and low as thunder, sings the arrow of the hunter to the rib cage of the deer.
He took the leap, like so many others, and made a goddamn masterstroke of it. Where it's rare an album has the audacity to call itself the world and then live up to the epic grandeur. The production is a nimble balance of Baroque pop and industrial, with undeniable grinding grooves and presence, and certainly the political edge to live up to that historic pedigree. But Alex Reid is a frontman who might be better suited to the theater than a lot of the grimy dives that would play a lot of industrial. He has so much expressive melodic presence to anchor the hooks, and my god, does this album have hooks that I could only imagine this crossing over on pure songcraft alone. That is, until we get to the content, which doesn't just meet the moment in terms of pure environmental, queer, and anti-fascist intensity, but also dares to dream bigger at what can and needs to be built in the wake of an order that is both corrupt and working exactly as it was designed to disenfranchise and destroy lives, both at home and abroad. For a project that is otherwise so accessible in its execution to then go past by any means necessary in some of the daring challenges to audiences, where not only do you need to preserve yourself and your communities, but also get outside, take the initiative, and the action needed to be the change you desire. Look, there have been times where I put albums considerably further to my left on my year-end list, arguably my entire career as a critic, with the most stark case that I can recall is when I put Doomtree's All Hands in 2015 over to Pimp a Butterfly. That was 10 years ago. And I don't know if it's purely a factor of my politics evolving as I've gotten older, or the material reality demanding new answers, or old answers with a new frame, because some things really don't change that much in anything but urgency. The World is that album for me in 2025. Not just that it feels the most relevant, but also that I can't imagine its relevance dissipating in years to come. Which on some level is terrifying, but is also exactly what was needed. The fact that it's also tremendous art in its own way, well, Michael Eisner said that in order for Disney to make money, they had to make great art. This aims a hell of a lot higher than that. It's not cool, it's not easy, it's incredibly enjoyable, but it belies the reality that great political art needs to deliver power, precision, and populism, and it does. For me, it's the best album of 2025. If you haven't heard it, and you likely haven't, you really should. And when you do, well, you'll know. I don't need to say any more. You'll understand. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, and subscribe. I hope all of you are going to be sticking around after this video, because there will be a State of the Channel video dropping before new projects come out on this channel. I say videos, but reviews are going to have a bit of a change coming up, and I'm looking forward to you all experiencing them with me. Again, this is my 13th year-end list. 13th year I've been putting out year-end list, and it feels all the more special for it. And again, thank you all for sticking around so long. Leave your list down in the comments below if you want to keep on supporting the channel or see a video like this early, or get albums on that upcoming schedule when it opens, or you never know. Anything else that might occur, just to yell at me on my Discord, that's all available. Again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there. Recession's likely inevitable. Just stay safe. You all know what to do. The options are just available here. But until then, I'm Mark. You're watching Spectrum Pulse. Welcome to 2026. And I'll see you next time.